I got the cops called on me for walking too loud, and I wish I were kidding because that would make this story a whole lot less stupid. I was 3 blocks away from the best Cuban sandwich in Naples, Florida. My stomach was growling like an old diesel engine, and some woman in a pearl-white golf cart decided my boots were a threat to civilization. That was the day I learned there are people in this world who will start a war over the sound of another human being minding his own business. It was a Tuesday right around noon, hot enough that the sun felt personal. You know that Florida heat, the kind that sits on the back of your neck like it's trying to prove a point. I was heading through downtown Naples, moving with purpose, because when I'm hungry I don't wander. I lock onto a sandwich like a missile. I'm 6'2", I wear heavy leather boots, not because I'm trying to make a statement, just because I like them, and when I walk, yeah, you hear it a little. Heel toe, solid contact, real pavement, real life. I could already taste lunch roasted pork, Swiss mustard pickles pressed into bread with that perfect crisp edge. I mean, I was mentally halfway through the sandwich already. Then I heard this high, angry electric whine behind me like a mosquito had taken out a second mortgage and upgraded itself. I glanced over my shoulder and here came this golf cart barreling down the oversized sidewalk path like it had diplomatic immunity. And this wasn't some sleepy little golf cart either. This thing was lifted metallic pearl-white chrome rims and a steering wheel wrapped in fuzzy hot pink material so bright it looked hostile. Behind it sat a woman who looked like she had been born disapproving and had only gotten worse with age. Her jeweled bifocals were catching the sunlight like warning beacons. Her visor was low, her lips were pinched so tight they'd practically vanished. She slammed the brakes and stopped maybe 3 inches from my knee. "Excuse me," she barked. Now I'm 32, so the young man that came after it didn't exactly offend me, but the tone sure did. I looked at her, then at the pink steering wheel, then back at her and said, "Yeah. Can I help you?" She pointed at my boots like they were evidence in a felony case. "Are you aware of how loudly you are walking?" I just stared at her. I let that silence sit there until even the palm trees seemed uncomfortable. "How loudly I'm walking?" "Yes," she snapped. "It's aggressive. It's incredibly aggressive pedestrianism. You are stomping. You're upsetting the poodles at number 42, and frankly, you are violating the peaceful aesthetic of this neighborhood." I laughed short and sharp, because what else do you do when somebody says aggressive pedestrianism with a straight face? "Ma'am," I said, "I'm just walking to get a sandwich. I have legs. They hit the ground." That's kind of how the whole thing works. That did not help. She leaned forward over that pink steering wheel like she was about to issue a declaration of war. "This is a quiet, respectable community. We do not tolerate people marching around like they're in a military parade. You look threatening." "A threat," I said. "I'm moving at maybe 3 miles an hour toward roasted pork. If that feels dangerous to you, you may need a hobby." That was when she grabbed her gold-cased phone and announced with the full confidence of a woman who had never once been told to calm down that she was calling the authorities. Because I was walking too loudly. I stood there while she called 911 and reported in a voice trembling with fake trauma that a large aggressive man was stomping down the sidewalk, intimidating residents with heavy footfalls. I wish I were polishing that for effect, but that was basically the complaint. And at that point I couldn't even leave, because if I walked away, she looked exactly like the kind of person who'd follow me to the sandwich shop and turn lunch into a hostage situation. So I waited. About 10 minutes later, a patrol SUV rolled up, lights, lazy engine humming, and out stepped Officer Miller. The man looked exhausted in a way I felt in my soul. He took one look at the golf cart, one look at her, one look at me, and I could tell he already knew this was nonsense. She launched into it before he could say a word. "Officer, this man is disturbing the peace. He is walking with malicious intent. Listen to his boots." Miller looked at me. "Sir, were you stomping?" I put my hands up. "Officer, I was walking like a normal person trying to get a sandwich." He sighed, deep and tired. Then he pulled me aside just enough to speak low. He said he understood how ridiculous it was. Believe me, he understood. But nuisance complaints in that area were a gray zone, and if she pushed it, he'd be buried in paperwork. Then he asked me almost apologetically if I could maybe change my gait, walk softer, just until I was out of her sight line. I looked at him and said, "So let me get this straight. Walking with purpose is aggressive now." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Essentially, yes." And right there, something in me shifted. Not rage exactly, more like clarity. Because when someone tries to control you over something that small, something that dumb, what they're really saying is they think the world belongs to them. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. So I smiled and said, "Got it." If walking is the problem, I'll find a less threatening form of transportation. I went home, forgot all about the sandwich, sat down at my laptop and started digging. For the next few hours, I went through city code, nuisance ordinances, pedestrian rules, public noise, language, zoning maps, easement records, all of it. And the more I read, the more I realized Miller had been right. Those rules were vague enough to be used like a club by anybody loud and connected enough. But vague rules cut both ways. That's the beauty of bureaucracy. If somebody wants to weaponize it against you, sometimes all you have to do is read one page further than they did. Then I found the first crack in the wall. Public sidewalks are traditional public forums. Expressive conduct, performance, symbolic action, all protected in ways ordinary walking isn't. That made me laugh sitting there alone in my apartment because the answer was so stupid it was perfect. But then things got better. I looked up her address, checked the county property maps, cross-referenced the parcel lines with the city right-of-way survey, and just sat there staring at my screen for a second. Her hedge, that big manicured wall of ficus she'd planted along the front of her property, the one she hid behind while ordering the police to regulate my footsteps. It wasn't actually all on her property. The city had a 6-foot public easement from the curb inward. Her hedge started at 4. 2 feet of that giant privacy wall was sitting on public land. I leaned back and just smiled. See, that was the twist she never saw coming. She thought she was defending her peace. What she'd really done was invite me to study her boundaries. And once you start measuring a bully's boundaries, you'd be amazed what turns out to be fake. The next morning, I put on the same boots, a neon yellow shirt, and a laminated card around my neck full of legal wording about expressive conduct. Then I headed back to her block, and I didn't walk. I skipped. Now let me tell you something. I am not a graceful man. A 6'2" guy in work boots has no business skipping in public, but I committed to it. Thud hop, knees, high arms swinging like an over-caffeinated parade float. And because simple skipping felt incomplete, I started singing nursery rhymes at full volume. Not well either. I sounded like a walrus having a crisis in church. By the time I reached the front of her house, I could see her through a gap in that illegal hedge staring at me like her soul had just left her body. Gardening shears dropped out of her hand. I locked eyes with her and kept going all the way through the itsy-bitsy spider, then finished with a bow dramatic enough to pull a hamstring. She screamed, of course, said I was a menace, said she was calling the police again. I'm performing, I yelled back, tapping the laminated badge on my chest. Beautiful day for the arts. And then I skipped right past her hedge while singing Row, row, row your boat, like a man who had finally found purpose. But the skipping was just the appetizer. The real move came later that week when I hired a contractor. I knew a big guy named Tony and had him help me place a temporary weighted pole on the public grass strip in front of her hedge. 15 feet tall, ugly as sin, with a bright pink flag on top that said freedom of speech in letters loud enough to irritate God. Bolted to the side was a little weatherproof box that looked official enough to scare the average control freak. Everything temporary permitted, carefully placed on public right-of-way. It was hideous, it was legal, it was magnificent. By that evening, the homeowners board had called an emergency hearing. I showed up in a tuxedo. Listen, if you're going to dismantle neighborhood tyranny, you might as well dress for it. She was sitting there at the board table, red-faced, behind her jeweled glasses, talking about harassment and public nuisance and aesthetic violations. She said I had terrorized her street with stomping, then skipping, then an unauthorized structure on her front lawn. That's when I asked very calmly, "On your front lawn, Barbara? Are you sure about that?" I handed over the permits, the easement map, the survey printout. The room went quiet in that special way rooms do when everybody realizes the loudest person there has made a catastrophic mistake. I explained that the pole was on public easement, permitted temporary, untouchable by the board. Then I showed them the real jewel, the county map proving her hedge, her pavers, even part of her fountain and signage, all of it crossed onto city land. Her face changed right in front of me. Not anger first, fear. And then I told her the part I'd saved for dessert. I had already filed a formal complaint with the city inspector's office that morning citing pedestrian safety and encroachment. You could have heard a pin drop. That was the moment I understood something that stayed with me since, and maybe you know this already, maybe you've learned it the hard way too. A lot of people act powerful right up until real power shows up. Not fake community power, not gossip, not committee power, not my nephew knows somebody power. I mean actual law, actual lines on paper, actual authority that doesn't care how loud you are at meetings. And when that happens, all that swagger drains out of them fast. A few days later, the county survey team showed up. I brought a folding lawn chair and a sparkling water. I sat there on the public easement next to my ridiculous pink flag, while two county guys in orange vests measured 6 feet in from the curb and spray-painted neon lines straight across her driveway through the base of her fountain and into that massive ficus hedge. It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Pure administrative violence. Clean, precise, no yelling, no drama, just paint paperwork and consequences. She came running out in a tailored suit, demanding answers, demanding they stop, demanding to know who filed the complaint. Then she saw me sitting there, legs crossed in my lawn chair, sipping sparkling water like I was front row at a matinee. The surveyor told her flat out that everything from the orange line to the street was public easement, and her hedge was an illegal encroachment. He handed her a notice, giving her 14 days to remove it all, or the city would do it for her and bill her. She looked at that paper like it had reached into her chest and squeezed. She still didn't move a thing. And that was my favorite mistake she made. Because on day 15, the city came back with heavy equipment. Not a landscaper, not a polite trimming crew, a skid steer with a steel grapple bucket and a dump truck behind it. I was there with coffee and a thermos, leaning against my pink flagpole like I had tickets. She came running out screaming, waving her arms trying to stop it, but the engine was louder than she was. The operator drove straight to the hedge, clamped that steel jaw into the base of it, and ripped out a whole section in one brutal pull. Roots snapping, branches cracking, dirt flying. 15 years of precious suburban privacy peeled out of the ground like a bad tooth. Then the machine rolled over the illegal edge of her brick pavers and crushed them. Tipped the fountain. Scooped debris into the truck. In less than half an hour, that front yard looked like karma had its own contractor. When it was over, she just sat there on the grass staring at the trench where her hedge used to be. No more wall, no more shield, no more little kingdom cut off from the world. Just open view from the street straight into her front window. I walked over to the edge of the orange line and said, "You know, if you hadn't complained about my footsteps, I never would have looked up the property line. Sometimes it really does pay to let a man go get his sandwich." She didn't answer, didn't even look at me. So I turned around and gave her one last skip down the block, boots thudding, voice carrying just enough to let the moment breathe. About a month later, Tony went back and picked up the pink flagpole. He sent me a photo from the street. The city had patched the trench with cheap grass, and stuck in the yard right by the front walk was a sign that said the house was for sale. She was moving. Guess living without a privacy wall exposed to all that dangerous pedestrian activity was just too much for her. So yeah, that's how it ended. No fistfight, no grand speech. Just codes, surveys, permits, easement lines, and one deeply foolish woman who thought being annoyed made her right. And I'll tell you this because I learned it standing there in the Florida heat, watching her hedge disappear into a dump truck. The people who try hardest to control everyone around them usually haven't looked too closely at the ground under their own feet. So what do you think, was that justice? Or was it revenge wearing a legal tie? And if somebody ever tried to police the way you exist in public, would you let it go? Or would you make them regret measuring your footsteps? Share your take and tell me if you've ever dealt with somebody who thought power meant they got to decide how other people breathe.